Thank you so much for joining us today on our AI compliance webinar. I will go ahead and introduce myself. So my name is Tracy Boyes. I'm a data privacy attorney. If you're detecting an accent, that is because I am South African. I'm sure a lot of people here are joining us globally. I'm sitting in the beautiful city of Cape Town. It's a beautiful sunny day today. And yeah, I've been dealing with, data privacy law and, data protection, the GDPR, CCPA, all GDPR, data privacy laws for about 7 years now. And I would say AI is the new kid on the block. So I'm learning all about AI as we go. And joining me today is Elad. He's a tech entrepreneur, and I'll let him introduce himself. And I'm so excited to have you as my guest today.
Thank you very much, Tracy. So as you said, AI is the new kid on the block. We like to say that this is the new Wild West, hence Lasso, hence the sheriff out there. So pleasure to be here, everyone. I'm Elad Schulman. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Lasso Security. Been in the tech industry for the last 25 years, always on the vendor side, always around cybersecurity, from small companies to large companies like HP and SAP. And since 2017, I'm an entrepreneur, built a few cybersecurity companies, invested in a few. And since 2022, when Gen AI burst into our lives, we realized that someone needs to go and secure that. Someone needs to be the new sheriff in the Wild West. And this is where Lasso came into the business. So we're into generative AI security. And as we'll discuss in a bit, we'll talk about how this relates to Lasso, Scytale, and the topic in hand.
Thanks so much, Elad. I must say, I really commend your startup. And this is not just me punting you because you're my guest. I must say, I think it's really cool tech. And especially since, ChatGPT has become such a huge part of our lives. I mean, I think all of us are using ChatGPT almost every day. And I think it's so important that we are actually protecting ourselves as well as our businesses from people just throwing the whole world into ChatGPT, and then obviously there's no confidentiality or protection of that data. So also coming from a personal data point of view, I think what your startup is doing is wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our poll of the day. So let's go on to our next slide. All right, so we're going to kick off with a poll just to get everybody, into attendees mode, into participation mode. So our poll today is: how is your organization currently using AI? Hopefully you can see the little pop-ups come up on the screen. I think there's a little bit of a lag today. There we go. Okay. So, are you one of the people that is like, I've never heard of AI, it's completely new to me? Are you dipping your toes in, but it's still human powered? We're using AI for some tasks, but humans are still mostly in charge for now. And I think our last option is we're all over AI. Like we don't even use our brains anymore. I think some people have become best friends with ChatGPT. We certainly like to joke ChatGPT is a key member of our team sometimes, because it really does help us. But obviously, we are still using our brains. So I think it's interesting. We've got a little bit of a spread going on. I see most people are saying they're using AI for some of their tasks, but not all of them. And some people are saying, we've embraced AI, and we're not even using our brains anymore. Elad, are you surprised by the results, or is this something you expected to see across the board?
No, I think that it's really aligned with what we see out there. Everyone today is working with AI to some extent. We don't see anyone who says, I don't know what that is. Every organization is working to some extent, whether it is their employees that are using, all sorts of chat tools, or whether it is they're already building things on top of AI in order to provide something for their end customers, improve internal processes. So definitely it's very much aligned, and we see the adoption growing more and more with every day that passes. So I suspect we'll see. I won't say that it will replace everyone and we won't think anymore, but we'll definitely see the weight on the last two answers.
Definitely. Okay, so we're going to go back to the presentation. Let's go back to the slides. Okay, so obviously today we're talking about AI and what is actually even happening with AI. I think that our slides decided to die on us again slightly.
Now again.
Technology. So this is why you still have to use your brain and you can't let AI completely take over because look what's happening in our webinar. Okay, so maybe just to jump right in, I think quite a few of us are probably sitting in this webinar today going, okay, well, I actually want to learn a little bit more about what is this big, the new kid on the block, what are all of these buzzwords and why is AI suddenly such a hot topic? I think in maybe the last 3 years or so, AI used to be maybe the stuff of science fiction, and it was coming slowly into our lives. And then I think suddenly, especially with ChatGPT coming out of basically nowhere, and really taking over our lives and becoming such a big part of our businesses, AI has really come into its own. So it's interesting to see. And then I would say what's driving the urgency. Obviously, now we've got the ISO 42001, which we'll get into in a moment. We've got the EU AI Act, and there's a lot of public pressure coming through at the moment. And I think what's interesting to note is, as I said to you, we've got ChatGPT. It's starting to take over our lives. It's also quite scary to think about all the misuses that could come from using AI. So, I've seen things like CV scanning, AI interviews. I mean, if we just take those two, what human rights violations could happen there is that if the algorithms are programmed incorrectly, we could maybe, for let's say a manager role, the CVs that come in, they'll exclude all women and only push men through to the next round, which is obviously huge and discriminatory, but things like that is happening. If the algorithm has bias in it. Also with AI interviews, it might, let's say, discriminate a certain group of people without even knowing. And then, I mean, self-driving cars. Think about, Tesla and all those, the different markets now that are trying to do self-driving cars. And then I always think about the trolley problem. Elad, I don't know if you know about the trolley problem, but the whole thing of you've programmed the car, an accident is going to happen. Does the car kill you and smash into a concrete barrier, or weave into the sidewalk and kill a child? What does it do? And I don't think AI hasn't even yet begun to figure out problems like that. But I think there's just so much forms of AI coming out now, especially since it's a new kid on the block. It really is the buzzword. And I think that the consumers that are using these products, including myself and Elad, we all need to be able to trust the products and services that we are using. And we need to know that they are ethical. And I think, especially with the EU AI Act, the main aim of this new act that is coming out is that it needs to still be human-centered AI. So we still need to care about, where are the humans coming in here? Is there humans checking the compliance? We do need to focus on ethics. So we need to be careful that we are still being ethical with what we're doing. We're not just going over the whole of the internet and Facebook and downloading everybody's faces and then putting it into a facial recognition scanner, which, I'm not making that up. That has really happened. So our faces are probably in that facial recognition scanner as we speak. And then something which we'll also be diving into quite a lot today is transparency and fundamental rights. So I think that's the main thing which the law is trying to now obviously come in line with tech, is that we are trying to protect fundamental and human rights at the end of the day. Also remember that the law is very slow. So AI is just rushing ahead, and the law tends to be quite slow. So Elad, if maybe you could just get into, what are you seeing in the markets and Gen AI in the numbers?
Sure thing. And it relates also to the poll that we recently sent, and it is really being massively adopted. And you can see here some numbers mainly from Gartner and also McKinsey. And everyone is using it today. So you can see at the bottom says 65% of the organizations are already using Gen AI for at least one function. And we're expecting it to grow more and more. And basically, you can see that, the numbers will go to 80% in 2026. And definitely one day, and not too far into the future, everyone will use Gen AI to some extent, and it will be everywhere. With that, we're starting to see more and more risks, security concerns, breaches that are related to AI. And you can see that 30% of the enterprises already experienced a breach against their AI systems. And 80% of them faced AI attacks. So it's not just that we're using AI to help us. Also, the attackers are using AI to advance their works. So definitely there is a need, not just for security, which I'm mostly handling, but definitely the governance aspect, the compliance are coming with a dedicated reason, and it is coming much faster than before. So we'll talk about some of the standards that are out there today, which are basically allowing us or helping us to get into this Gen AI era, do it in a compliant manner, safe manner, secure manner.
And isn't it just so ironic that when new inventions are like uptaken by the whole population, then obviously the hackers are there too, and they're also ready to exploit it just as much as we are.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we're going to dive into.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Elad. So we're just going to dive into now the ISO 42001. I would say it's quite a fundamental framework. So if you do ISO 42001 first, and then you look at jumping into the EU AI Act, it will probably help you quite a lot, especially with the security measures. And Elad, if you can just expand for us on what is your practical experience around ISO 42001, and do you have any top tips?
Sure thing. I'll highlight a bit more, about what it means. We are also not just working according to it, but also, working with our customers to adapt it. This is also where the partnership between Lasso and Scytale kicks into play. So first, just so people will understand, this is the first international standard that is focusing specifically on managing artificial intelligence systems, but do it in a responsible, ethical, and safe way. It started, in late 23, and it's basically a framework that should allow organizations that are either designing, developing, deploying, or even using AI. We'll touch upon that in a bit. So it affects almost everyone today, and it is around establishing internal governance around AI activities. It's assessing, mitigating the risks around that. And definitely we want it to be trustworthy, Tracy, as you said. So bias, explainability for the models, all sorts of, there are quirks with the autonomy that the models have. And it is really around fostering trust on the outputs. And there are a lot of, things around security that we're saying don't over-rely on what's happening, from the models. Some people relate to the hallucinations of the model, but it also allows us to continuously improve our AI processes and make sure that we're aligned both from an ethical, legal, and from organizational values. And along with that, I won't drill too much into that. There is a complete annex in ISO 42001 about what are the control objectives. For that, there are 38 specific controls in 9 different control objectives, including, policies and how you handle it within the organization and how you handle data and definitely information systems. So we would be very much happy to elaborate on that, but I'm just giving you the highlights. But one of the things that also I would like to highlight a bit is, we talked a bit about, EU AI Act. There's also NIST, ARRMF. So there are a bit differences here that we need to understand. Because EU AI Act is regulatory and is actually classifying AI systems by risk, unacceptable, high, limited, where currently ISO 42001 is voluntary and providing supporting compliance framework. But you can think of it, especially for high-risk systems, as serving as an audit baseline for demonstrating your due diligence and how you're complying with the regulation which is enforcing. And Tracy, I guess you'll mention it in a bit. It already has some teeth that if you won't comply with the EU AI Act, unlike ISO 42001. So definitely it provides us into a framework of how we can comply with the EU AI Act, especially providing useful audits and how we can do assessment for that. NIST, on the other hand, NIST AI-RMF is guidance focused, emphasizing trustworthy AI principles like fairness, robustness, explainability, and NIST AI-RMF is kind of like why or what we should do, and ISO 42001 is actually how we're actually going to do this. So the ISO is actually enabling an organization-wide implementation of AI systems. And with that, also, we need to remember that there is ISO 27001, which is basically a security framework for information systems as a whole. So it should protect, our information assets. 27001, ISO 42001 is governing specifically AI systems and behaviors, and are mandatory certifications for ISO 27001. Still, 42001 is not mandatory yet, but an important thing here is why people should actually care, and it is not just for AI companies, it is for everyone. As mentioned, it's providing you, it's making you ready for the regulation. So if you need to comply with the EU AI Act, it's definitely helping you to comply with it, and also with future laws. Recently, we had the executive order in the US from the Biden administration, which was revoked, but is being changed, and every geography has its own. But also more than ever, we're starting to see that it provides some sort of a basis for reputation. It demonstrates how proactive you are and how committed you are for ethical and trustworthy AI. It also provides structure and operational clarity, allowing you to apply your governance model on the AI life cycle better. And one would claim, and definitely we see that it would give a market advantage for companies that are leveraging AI. So showing that you are complying with it definitely will give you an advantage against others that won't. And eventually, especially coming from cybersecurity background, it's all about risk mitigation. And we need to manage the risk. We want to reduce the exposure to legal, reputational, and even societal risks. So that could all have implications on organizations that are leveraging AI in an ungoverned way. So again, it's just the beginning, but this is again to open you all into this ISO, and definitely encourage you to embrace it sooner rather than later, although it is not mandatory yet. And just to highlight, if it wasn't clear, at least according to the EU AI Act, to know if you are using an AI system or if you are developing something. So anything that leverages, machine learning algorithms, definitely deep learning, that is designed to have some sort of levels of autonomy and adapt to situations. So the systems are learning, they're adapting from and getting, understandings from the input that they receive, and definitely generate output based on that. Those all are considered AI systems, and more, you will learn that AI is eventually everywhere. So one of the things that people should start asking when they're examining a specific system to work with is, does it have AI in the back end? And we're starting to see that in the legal framework of all of the T's and C's that every tools have. And we are seeing legal teams and risk teams specifically demanding from the vendors that they work with, indicate if you are using AI, and if you are, what sort of regulations are you following, and what are you doing in order to adapt yourself to this new climate. So Tracy, back to you.
Thanks, Elad. Thanks, Elad. Yeah, so just to maybe expand on what you were saying about AI systems. So I think this is probably one of the most hotly contested definitions that we've seen in recent years. It's still actually getting debated as we speak, but this is kind of what the EU AI Act and what the EU has come to some sort of conclusion as to what actually is an AI system. So firstly, before you start panicking, you actually need to figure out, am I using an AI system? And then if the answer is yes, then you need to figure out what kind. So just to touch on the definition itself, it's AI systems. That means a machine-based system that is designed to operate with levels of autonomy and that may exhibit adaptiveness after development, and that, for explicit or implicit objectives, infers from the input it receives and how to generate outputs such as predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments. Now, I know that is a mouthful, but for me, I think how I think about AI and the definition of AI is, have I given a machine a lot of data, or just data? I've given it data, and the output is it's giving me, I can't necessarily say exactly how it got to that output. So it's been adaptive. It's learned from itself. It has drawn its own conclusions. If we're just using software, we're obviously giving software rules, and it follows those rules to the T to give me an output. But AI, obviously, through its own adaptness, it comes to its own conclusion. And for me, the whole side of that it's capable of learning and adjusting after deployment, that's very important in my personal understanding and definition of what an AI system is. Elad, do you have anything that you personally you use as a test to determine, well, am I using an AI system?
So one of the things that up until recently we were trying to understand, if it made sense that a human generated a message, but now it is very hard to determine. I think that for me, one of the best tests is to check the deterministic output of the system. So just try it yourself. If you're asking ChatGPT the same question twice in separate sessions, you will get different answers all the time. And that, the statistical nature of this technology is highlighting very easily that that was generated by an AI system. So just ask it the same question twice, get different answers, and it's not that they're just different in one word or something like that, that maybe someone, miswrote it. It might be completely different, up to the extent that those could be two contradicting answers. And this is where we're getting into hallucinations and the bias of the models and things like that. So for me, this would be currently the ultimate test. But as we're moving forward, it will get into a situation that we will not be able to determine if an output was generated by AI. For example, a few months ago, if you asked, Midjourney to generate a picture of a human, it would draw it with 6 fingers. But now it's not there anymore. So the models adapt. So, a human with 6 fingers, it's not something that we would create or film. But it's getting very, very difficult. And one of the things is that, AI is becoming smarter and smarter. And right now, people will say that, right now AI is like a very smart college graduate. And so we'll talk about IQ levels going forward. The AI systems will have IQ much more than the smartest person on the planet, and this is where us mortals would have the difficulty to understand that this is actually AI.
I guess a good example of that is the fact that AI chess can now beat the best chess players in the world. The AI has gotten so good that it even outsmarts the chess masters. It's quite crazy to think. And then also, going back to the fact that AI is getting smarter by the day, and we can't really tell. We're going to get to a point where we won't be able to tell human-generated content from AI. This is where the whole transparency obligations become so important, which we will get into in a moment. But Just a nice thought to think about. Okay, so just to get onto a little bit about the EU AI Act. So remember, the EU AI Act it's aimed at targeting anyone that creates, deploys, or uses AI. Now, the main approach with this act has been a risk-based approach. So if you know me, you know I love everything data privacy and the GDPR, and I'm always rambling on about it. And this is where I see quite a lot of overlap between the EU AI Act and the way the GDPR was drafted, in that it is principle-based. And I think it's a good thing that it's principle-based, because it needs to keep up with the fact that technology is moving at such a rapid pace. And the fact that it's risk-based approach is you need to obviously determine if your AI is high risk, minimal, or limited. So I'll get into that in a moment. But also just note that for general purpose AI, so that's the ChatGPTs, the Geminis, the Copilots of the world, there is also special provisions in the Act for that. So they've kind of got their own separate provisions and things to comply with. I'd say the most important thing there, once again, would be transparency and copyright directives. I think we all know deep down that ChatGPT has basically trawled the entire internet and Reddit, etc., and taken all of that information and put it into its systems. So that's why we obviously sometimes get answers that are not factually correct coming out of ChatGPT. So always be careful. Don't use it as Google. Use it as a writing tool. That's what I always say. As Elad was mentioning earlier, also the whole hallucinations thing. But so I guess to address all the copyright infringements that have already happened, the EU AI Act has come along and said, okay, we need to have good IP and copyright directives in place, and we obviously need to have good transparency. People need to know that they are interacting with AI just because it is becoming so good. Also, just at a high level, I want you to note that the key actors of this act is a provider and a deployer. A provider is someone who is active in the AI's development, or you are using the AI as big part of your product. So you are integrating maybe somebody else's AI, but it has become a massive part of your product. And then you also get deployers. So they are using third-party AI providers to help them with their product. So obviously, if you're a provider, a lot more obligations will fall upon your shoulders. So once again, quite similar to like your GDPR, where you've got your controller and your processor. Here you've got your providers and your deployers. And the providers, I would say, are the big daddies who have all of the obligations. Also to note, just like the GDPR, the scope of the EU AI Act is extraterritorial. So it applies to all AI systems used in the EU, as well as AI systems created maybe outside of the EU, but used within the EU. So if you are planning, I don't know, let's say you're sitting in Australia, but you are planning on selling to EU citizens and using your product within the EU, just remember that the EU AI Act will apply to you. So it will have that global effect, just like the GDPR. And it's something we like to call as the Brussels effect. So the EU tends to make things in Brussels, write laws, and then because of the extraterritoriality, it sort of affects the whole world, which is quite interesting. But I mean, not something that I can object to, because from an ethical point of view, it is really great that we have these laws now to protect us as humans in society, and to protect our fundamental rights, which is the most important thing. So just to get onto the different types of risks that you need to worry about. So unacceptable risk is completely banned by the EU AI Act. So that is things like social scoring. If it's checking, let's say there are cameras watching you at all times and checking if you jaywalk, and then they deduct from your social score, and then you can't fly out of the country, for instance. I know that sounds like out of an episode of Black Mirror. If we have any Black Mirror fans here, just remember, if it feels a bit like Black Mirror, it's probably banned and unacceptable risk under number one. Facial recognition technology. So like I said earlier, any sort of tech that has basically trawled the whole of Facebook, for instance, found my face, said, okay, this is Tracy Boyes' face. and made a huge database of that is also now deemed unacceptable. Any sort of AIs, any dark pattern AIs or manipulation that you don't even know is AI is obviously deemed unacceptable. Then high-risk AI. So this is where the Act really, puts a lot of obligations on the providers and deployers. And it's very important for you to note if you have deemed that you are using an AI system, and now you've deemed, okay, I do fall under the high-risk category, then you better start working on your 42,001 and your EU AI Act compliance right now, because it's about a year until your due date. But the high risk systems, there obviously is a whole list. I'll get into it in a moment. But it's anything to do with critical infrastructure, governments, policing, employment, education, public services, border control, anything to do with creditworthiness, the justice system. So basically anything that could really impact somebody's fundamental or human rights, their right to dignity, etc., their right to a fair trial, that is generally deemed as high risk. Then I just want you to note that in terms of limited risk, most general purpose AI has been deemed as limited risk. And when you're dealing with limited risk, you as a user just need to know that you are dealing with a machine. So that's the basis of it. And any sort of emotional recognition systems or chatbots will be limited risk. And then you've got minimal risk right at the bottom. So obviously not a huge amount of obligations there, but that would just be like AI video games or spam filters. So just in terms of the timelines, so I know you're probably asking yourself the question, okay, well, when do I need to start worrying about all of these things? So the general purpose AI systems that will kick off now in 2025, so the 2nd of August. So that's when you need to start worrying about that. But I think most people on this call, either 26 or 2027 will be the years that we need to start worrying. So when it comes to Appendix 3, so that's the 2026 deadline, it's any sort of high-risk AI that has got anything to do with biometrics, infrastructure, employment, law enforcement, education, etc. You can look it up. There's a whole list under Appendix 3. But yeah, any sort of critical infrastructure, I think you would probably know already if you are high-risk AI. And then for 2027, that would be any other high-risk AI that wasn't under Appendix 3 now applies to you in 2027. So at this point, I know you're probably thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, okay, this all sounds pretty overwhelming. What do I actually do to comply? So we're going to try and give you a few top tips. Obviously, as I said earlier, I think doing the ISO 42001 is a great place to start. It gives you some sort of a tangible path to follow. So if you're feeling a little bit lost, it's always quite nice to do an ISO framework and go, okay, these are some of the steps I need to take. Obviously, do note that everything is still really up in the air. These acts are so new. The EU Commission itself is still trying to come up with guidelines, etc. And we don't really have a huge amount of guidelines right now. But just to note, some of the top tips here is your risk management system, your data quality and governance, and documentation and traceability. So those top three, that really applies to any sort of high-risk systems. And then as I've been going over and over again, transparency is key and human oversight. So that doesn't matter where in the pyramid you fall, but if you are dealing with AI or you're planning on selling AI within the EU, you need to be transparent about it. People need to know they're dealing with AI, and human oversight is really important. Elad, I'm going to throw it over to you. So just from your personal experience, do you have any top tips for us with dealing with these acts or standards?
Yeah, so definitely. And again, I'll complement here our partnership. So definitely working with, companies and providers that providing you the framework and the support to actually manage those risks. So we would, of course, recommend Scytale. And we are very happy customers of Scytale as well, even before the partnership. So definitely you need the risk management systems. You need a way to track, what the different standards and regulations are coming. And of course, it all comes to, identify what data you have, make sure that it's in good quality and that you can govern it. So a lot of the processes around that is find where the data is, make sure who has access to it, that is relevant, that is up to date. A lot of the times we think that we have an internal procedure, but it's not up to date. No one is following that. So definitely documentation, updated documentation, where you have traceability for everything that you do. If you're doing penetration testing, who was doing that? When? What were the results? Did you do any mitigations based on the responses? And of course, with that, everything that you do, transparency is key. You need to be able to present the findings and do it in a very honest way and in a transparent way, not just internally, but also for your auditors and for everyone who just come from the outside. It could be vendors that you're working with. If you're doing, vendor management process and things like that. And eventually, and this is definitely relevant now as we're talking, you cannot have AI handle everything. People might say, okay, I'll let AI do all of these processes for me. People need to manage these processes. They take time, they take effort for a right reason, and you need to have human judgment. So eventually, when you need to prioritize all of the tasks, you need to understand what is critical, what did you do, did you invest the right time, what is maybe nice to have, but you need to know that one day you need to address it. And when you're combining all of that, definitely you need both a system to help you manage it, and you need to work with the experts. Theoretically, everyone can do it on their own, but you are not the experts. You need someone that will be a force multiplier for you, help you eventually save time and save money. So although it will work, it will cost you money to work with a specific framework, specific tool, specific vendor, but that eventually will save you time, effort, money, and eventually this is not your main business. It just supports your business. So you need to do it. You need to do it in a very good way. So it's worth investing in working with the best of the best.
I couldn't agree more. So just to then, obviously, not to scare you too much, but we do need to discuss fines for non-compliance. Because like with everything in life, if there's a law and you break it, then there obviously are penalties and fines. And the penalties and fines are pretty harsh. They're actually more harsh than the GDPR fines. So if you are found to be doing any sort of or using prohibited AI, or any sort of AI in a prohibited manner, then it would be up to 35 million euros or 7% of your global annual turnover. Any other violations of the Act, it's 50 million euros or 3%. And then for supplying incorrect information, it is up to 7.5 million euros or 1.5% of global annual turnover. So, as I said, with anything in life, if you break the rules, you unfortunately have to pay. So you don't want to become one of those people. Also, from a reputational point of view, as I said earlier, people want to be able to trust products that they are using and the services. They want to know that they are ethical, that they aren't infringing on people's human rights. And in order to do so, you obviously need to be compliant and you need to have a good reputation around it. And, if you were to get a fine for one of these practices, it could destroy your really good reputation in the market within seconds. So it's always something I think about is how long did it take my company to get such a good reputation and how many seconds does it take to destroy it? Not much. And then, as Elad said, we do have a partnership now. So at Scytale and Lasso, we are able to help you comply with both of these acts. We do have our compliance automation. We do, all your ISOs. We obviously do ISO 42001. We've just released the EU AI Act, which is very exciting. So as best as possible, we've tried to give you some tangible steps to follow to try and get compliant with this within the given timeframes. Although, as I said to you, it is quite challenging at the moment just because we don't have a lot of guidance notes. The EU is still busy debating what the definition of an AI system is. And I think, the law is obviously slow and AI is moving super quickly. Elad, if you just want to get into your governance and how Lasso can help you.
So I'll touch two aspects of Lasso out of three. So basically, Lasso provides both governance capabilities, runtime defense, and also posture and red teaming for the ones that are developing applications based on Gen AI. So around the governance, we're focusing from one hand on the inventory of which models with third-party tools you're working with, what are the risks and scorecards associated with those. On the other hand, we're bringing, out of the box policies, which later on, as I mentioned, you can enforce, and it is based on the different standards. So there are different controls that can enforce it in an organizational perspective. You can customize it. It also covers safety and moderation. And as mentioned, it's complying, with the regulation across the globe. Definitely here, the partnership and the integrated solutions work. And afterwards, you need basically to secure that in runtime, which means how can you protect those systems, your systems or your employees when you're interacting with Gen AI? And that can be either your employees that are working with Gen AI, or it can be applications that you're developing or agents now that people are working. And it is coming basically to address five main concerns that organizations can have. The first one is around discovery, which tools, which models people are using, who is using them. And if in the past we were talking about shadow IT, now we're talking about shadow AI. So people that are working with us are amazed that there are dozens of unsanctioned tools that are already in use within their organization. They didn't know anything about that. Second is addressing the question, what are people actually doing with it? So from an observability standpoint, the ability to record the prompts which are being sent to the models, the responses which are getting back, to audit them, and later on even provide them as proof. A lot of the regulation and the standards are around providing proof that something had happened. Then the question is around identity. How can we make sure that the person or the machine has the right to see specific data or ask specific requests? And how can we prevent unauthorized information retrieval? In the past, we were talking about role-based access, where a specific role had permission to access the system. Now we're talking about context-based access control. So only in a specific context, you're allowed to ask a specific question. For example, if the system has access to our finance and HR system, so the model has access, someone might ask the question, what is the salary of my boss? And get an answer. So if you're not, in finance or HR, you're not allowed to ask this question. So this is context-based access control. Fourth, how can we detect if something problematic happened, like data leak, personal information, the financial information, customer data, intellectual property that a lot of people are handing over to ChatGPT and those tools. The attacks of this world, how can you make sure that those didn't happen, like prompt injection, jailbreak, poisoning, or any other sort of anomaly, including content and topic moderation? Are people asking the chat tools things that maybe we don't want them to ask? So I'll take an extreme case. How can I hurt myself? You don't want them to actually ask that within, company premises or company tools. But last and definitely not least, in the world that we cannot delete data. Once the data gets to the model, you cannot delete it. And the right to be forgotten that we have in GDPR is taken away from us. So alerting when something happened is not enough. You have to anonymize data on the fly and even block complete interactions in case there was any foul play there. So these are the concepts of runtime defense. And Lasso is there with all sorts of capabilities to protect employees that are using Gen AI chatbots or applications that are connected on API level to the models, or agents and MCPs now. So wherever it is, we can help put the controls in runtime and make sure that you are complying with the different regulations and standards.
And as you said, people are already using AI, so you might as well do it securely. I don't think blocking AI throughout your organization is the answer. I think that's really an archaic approach. So it's better to use it securely. And you can, Scytale and Lasso are obviously here to help you. Right, so we've reached the end of our presentation today. We are obviously very happy to take some questions from you. So if you've got any questions, Happy for you to pop them in the chat, and Elad and I will answer them as best as possible. So yeah, I think probably we'll wait for some questions to come up. But I hope you learned something today. And especially if you're feeling a little bit confused about what are all these regulations relating to AI, I hope we've answered those questions while we were going through it. Okay, I see people are busy typing, so we'll wait. As I said a moment ago, I do think it is super archaic to just completely ban AI in your companies. And I do know some of the, those older big companies that have been around for ages, they have just completely banned AI, which is a completely silly approach. I think you're slowing down your employees too. But then also you need to protect what they're putting into AI, because I mean, how many people are guilty of just throwing heaps of emails, contracts, etc., into ChatGPT and asking, it to reply to the email for you. And you never know how much confidential information is in there. From my side, personal data. There's always personal data in these questions, so that also obviously worries me from a GDPR point of view. Okay. So, Elad, I think this is perhaps maybe a question for you, if you are able to answer it. So who in Israel is going to certify these companies? Do you know if there is a certification body?
So definitely there are. I can't remember by heart who certified us. I know that some of the work was done by PwC. I think that Mechon Atkanim can also do that, but there are several companies, and I can check who actually helped us. And I know that there are some companies that are working with Scytale in those engagements because Scytale is supporting it and not doing the actual certification. Please leave your details, and we'll make sure that someone gets back to you with that. I can also recommend the one that did it for us. Try to check it in parallel, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, we can obviously help you with your certification, but yeah. All right, so then we've got a question from Adam. So he says, what risk do you think AI has in manufacturing? I am from a company called iMaintain. We provide troubleshooting solutions through an AI chatbot. What risks do you think we face? So I think it goes back down to the fact of, is your AI high risk, minimal, or limited risk? I know at face value, most chatbots are probably limited risk or even minimal risk. So there might not be too much sort of obligations on you versus high risk. But then it also depends in what manufacturing you are in. So any sort of critical infrastructure, any sort of manufacturing that could, bring down then, let's say, the whole power grid, for instance, then you would fall into a different level of risk. Elad, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add to that.
Yeah. So for that, I would say, okay, this troubleshooting chatbot is connected to some sort of a data source that you have. And the question is there anything that in that data source that you would not want people to get? So if someone can exfiltrate sensitive data from it and try to manipulate the chatbot to spit out information that it shouldn't. And second, if someone would manipulate or cause the chatbot to answer in a way that would make you look bad, or it would provide false information, something that someone might sue you for, or it would provide you a brand damage. For example, there is a very known use case with an airline, Air Canada, if I'm not mistaken, that someone manipulated the chatbot there to give them a flight ticket for $1. So it depends on what they're getting and how they can manipulate it in a way that can hurt, basically, iMaintain in false answers or generating information. For example, if that chatbot is connected to OpenAI, I will tell you what we've seen in other cases, and this is called denial of wallet attack, which means that someone would go to your chatbot and ask them information about things that are not related to iMaintain. For example, write me a Python code that does something, and they would get free GPT from your chatbot, or they would manipulate it, and this will cost you money. So they will actually get free access to the underlying model. So these kinds of risks that are happening, we see them often with our customers. So basically, you want to make sure that the chatbot is in line, aligned to the task, is not manipulated, not spitting any information that it shouldn't, definitely not sensitive information that you have, and someone cannot impact it to do something that you don't want. These are the risks, and it is not just in manufacturing, it's basically everywhere. Again, feel free to reach out if you want, to see a demonstration of how that can happen, and maybe get, more details into similar use cases. Then we can do some analysis on your specific use case.
And also remember, once again, transparency is key. So people need to know that they are interacting with the chatbot when they are speaking with your company. Oh, all right. So Vinay says, what is the best way of identifying what are different AI applications used and data sources are connected? Elad, I don't know if you want to take this one.
Yeah. So you need to have basically scanning of where people are accessing. And I mentioned before the discovery of the tools and the models. One way is to scan which systems people are going. And we have a database of more than 10,000 tools which are maintained, and we keep on refreshing it. So every time that someone is going to an AI application, which is deemed to have, relevant usage of AI, we are learning on that, and then we're able to monitor it. If people inside the organization are, downloading models, open source models from Hugging Face or things like that, you need to have scanners that either on the network to see that someone is using it, or even into the code repositories to see that someone is using an open source tool, sanctioned or unsanctioned. But basically, you need to have discovery capabilities. So it is usually from the network or from, code repositories. Also, some data leak prevention tools or endpoint agents are able to highlight some AI tools which are being used, and the list grows on a day-to-day basis.
Oh, thank you. Right. Ionis, I hope that I didn't just completely butcher your name. So that he or she says, for which job / positions ISO 42001 certification is most suitable to acquire? So I'm not sure if you're asking for yourself, what position or job to get ISO 42001 certified. I'm not too sure. Elad, do you know? It's not very clear, the
Able to
question.
acquire that, so it's it can be risk officers, people from legal. In some cases, security will be demanded to do that. In small organizations, definitely, the COO or the CFO, these types of positions are requested to present, certification of the not just 42001, but also 27001 or SOC 2 or GDPR or others. So these are the roles that are more relevant to be required. That.
And then James says, is big tech going to enforce the new regulation, and how are they doing it now? James, I think, as I said earlier, it's the Brussels effect. So if the EU mandates this, then generally it starts affecting the big companies, and then from there it starts affecting everybody else, just like the GDPR. I think Europe obviously is such a big market in the world. So they have obviously mandated that you now need to comply with the EU AI Act. And then in doing so, you need to obviously comply with ISO 42001 to make your EU AI Act compliance meaningful. I think it's like with any laws around the world. It's just better from a reputational point of view to say that you comply. It's the same with the GDPR. It's become the gold standard around the world. And if you comply with that, you'll probably comply with all the other EU AI acts or the AI acts that are going to come around the world. So just for me, follow the gold standard. It helps with reputation. It helps with getting sales over the line. Elad, I don't know if you've got anything to add.
No, nothing much on that.
Right. Thanks. Okay. I don't know if we've got any other questions. I don't see any. Okay. I think then we can wrap it up. We're nearly on the hour, so we can wrap it up. I just want to say thank you so much to Elad for joining me today. It's been fantastic co-hosting with you. So thank you so much for your time. And as I said, Lasso is a fantastic company. I think what they're doing is amazing, especially since we are all using ChatGPT and Gemini and Copilot as part of our jobs, as part of our daily lives. We also need to protect from a GDPR point of view, from a confidentiality point of view, etc., what we are actually putting into the AI. So think before you put things into general purpose AI. And then obviously from my side, remember with Scytale, we are obviously able to help you comply with 42,001 and the new EU AI Act. So thank you so much. You know where to get hold of us. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And we'll be sending a recording out of the webinar afterwards. So thanks again. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day or evening from wherever you are coming from.